All right, so I grew up in Montgomery County on a farm, grain and dairy farm up county. And in the 60s and 70s, I date myself here, but on my farm we saw one deer, and it was a very undernourished looking female. And that was quite a sight. Most farmers at that time hadn't seen any. So I went away, went to school, came back, got a job as an extension agent in Montgomery County. This was 1980. And at that time, we were beginning to see deer come back into the county. And for a few years there, where Brian went, we had that perfect balance of deer, human. If you look at the scales, the farmers would say things to me like, gee, it's nice to see a few deer back. Yeah, they eat a little bit of my crops, but it's not too bad. Well, within 5 to 10 years, we were to the point that the county council had gotten enough complaints from enough different constituents that by resolution, they created this citizens task force, which I had the pleasure to serve on, I guess one could say. It was quite an intensive process. Now, granted, think back in those days, there were only 1 or 2 jurisdictions in the whole country that were doing any kind of deer management. I think there was one maybe in New York and maybe one somewhere else. So it wasn't something where there was a blueprint for what was going to happen. So this was in 1993. So essentially we're talking about 25 years in Montgomery County of a deer management program. What are some advantages of a group like this? Well, you learn a lot about what other people do and what other agencies do in terms of managing this resource. You have an opportunity, particularly those of you in extension, I think this is important. I had an opportunity to build relationships with DNR, with Park and Planning, with County Council, with other groups, and I ended up working with them that I may never have worked with if not for this process. So think about that. You get a very broad range. I was really surprised at the expertise and the range of knowledge we had on this task force. Where you do get some consensus, it tends to carry a lot of weight. Disadvantages, consensus is hard to get, all right? You get 25 people, you get 25 opinions, okay? And minority reports could emerge. We thought one might emerge from our report, but one did not, but it could. The usual suspects brought us to this. This is a little deer exclusion built in a soybean field. This one is just early yield monitor data where you see red. This is a farm surrounded by a wooded area. Where you see red, that indicates low yields, typically less than 50 bushel per acre corn. So we had significant problems there. This is a slide. One thing I've noticed, if you've been in deer management long enough, it seems like we all have the same slides, all right? So, and this is the Black Hills slide that you've seen, all right? Ryan had it and Ann had it, all right? So the Lyme disease. So all these issues were brought together in this task force, and I want to tell you a little bit about the process and a little bit about the results. And of course, we've got this kind of scene that happens quite often. And that was one of the loudest complaints when you have a $1 million home in Chevy Chase and your landscape is getting eaten up by deer. You're not going to be very happy about it, and they tend to call their council, their elected officials. So, who was on this task force? We had parks personnel, both local and DNR. We had extension. We had farmers. We had homeowner representatives. Hunting organizations were represented, animal rights, the police, the park police, federal parks, council staff. I want one thing to be very clear. I wish it wasn't being recorded, but it is. This committee was stacked. And it was stacked in the sense that something was going to happen with management of deer. All right? It was just inevitable. I could tell from meeting number 1. Not that it was easy to get to any of it, because there are a lot of instances where hunters, for example, and farmers, their motivations can be quite different, all right? Farmers are more of, I got to get them to stop eating what I'm growing, and hunters want well, we want some nice big deer to be able to harvest as well. So there were conflicting viewpoints, certainly. All right, so management alternatives that the group came up with were maintain status quo, using repellents, fencing, altering habitat, doing supplemental feeding. There was somebody doing that near Seneca State Park for a long time, and that was quite a mess. Modify legal harvest, not modify it down, but modify it to be able to take more females, etc. Ag damage permits, what can we do to facilitate that process? Direct reduction programs, deer contraception, trapping deer and then moving them somewhere else. And lastly, my favorite is restore predators. So these were the things that we considered as a group. Now, public meetings, yes. Supplemental feeding is when you actually set up a feeding station for deer for whatever reason. Maybe you feel like there's an area where they're not getting enough food, etc., and you essentially feed them corn. All right? It's really not a very smart thing in most cases, because what tends to happen is I think they tell their buddies, and pretty soon if you had 10, you got 20. If you had 20, you got 30. You know how it goes. So, and then where you have that, particularly if you're right along a busy road, you're going to have more vehicle deer accidents. All right? You're going to have more of that stuff going on. You're going to have Lyme disease cases bump up in that area probably. So there's lots of things that make some of these alternatives impractical, okay, in most cases. So we had public meetings to go along with this process, and I can tell you from being there that they were kind of scary. All right, these two public meetings. Montgomery County is a hotbed for animal activism. All right, and we also had a lot of hunters in the room, and some farmers, and parks personnel, etc. But it was quite contentious at times, and you kind of wondered. I'm glad it was 25 years ago, as opposed to today, because who knows what would happen today? There might be fights breaking out everywhere. But it was really a fascinating process. Many viewpoints were represented here. There were some short educational presentations, and then there was breaking up into groups for discussion. And out of the group discussion came a lot of the basis for recommendations in moving forward. For example, let me go through modify legal harvest. So everybody that was in these meetings was asked, all right, modify legal harvest, is that acceptable? All right, 76 of 248 said that was acceptable. Unacceptable, 52 people. Effective only where hunting is permitted, which is sort of obvious to me, but 23 people said that. 20 said inhumane, so you could put the 20 really in with this group of unacceptable. Concern for public safety, so they're kind of in that group too. Use of public parklands. These are people that wanted hunting on public lands, okay? So they're sort of in that acceptable group. Increase the doe harvest. They're in the acceptable group, etc. So those are kind of the range of viewpoints that you got. Let's look at another one, deer contraception, all right? 47 people thought this was acceptable to try this. 42 unacceptable, also unacceptable. It's too costly. Additional research is necessary. Well, as Ryan touched on, one of the things that came out of the task force is we did do some research with contraception, and we still found that it was, at least in free-ranging deer, it's just not practical. So anyway, so there's this broad range of responses. And then at the end, people got to pick three. Pick three things, and you can weight your top one by giving it 3 points. Your second choice gets 2 points, and your third one gets 1 point. Hence, there's more points than there were people. You remember there's 200 and some people. So, modify legal harvest got the most points with almost 24%. What was second here? Looks like direct reduction which was another result of this process, came in about 21. We had 10% or so people say that using more crop depredation permits would be a good thing, and then about 10% that said fencing was a good alternative. Look at the number of people that thought contraception was something that was viable, a fair number of responses there, which again, it gives you an indication of the type of diversity we had in the public process. So, as a result of that, very soon after, there was a deer management plan developed. The first one was in 1995, and from there, we began, well, actually, we began it, I think, in 94 with direct reduction in selected parks. Those of you that know where the extension office is at the Ag History Farm Park, direct reduction began there in 1994. And there's some success. I mean, we have success stories here. All right, for example, at Ag History, that wasn't farmed in 1994. That is now cropped, all right? The numbers, I think, that we were getting from our FLIR photography back then were something like 140 per square mile in this park. They knocked those numbers down where parks did direct reduction programs, either through sharpshooters or managed hunts, knocked them down dramatically. Now, the problem is, by the time you get around to your reduction next year, it's like a big vacuum, because anybody that's in central Maryland understands how much edge habitat we've got, how cut up everything is. We've got farm fields, we've got developments, we've got parks, we've got all this hodgepodge. And 1 out of 6 acres in Montgomery County is public or parkland. 1 out of 6. That's where they go, all right? I'll give you a personal example. I live on a farm still, 54 acres, right on the edge of the ag reserve. We're in agriculture. Across the road, it's development, plus a 400-acre park with no population management. Behind me is ag reserve, is 25 acres of woods, all right? So every year, on the farm we use, it's a combination of row crops and hay, all right? Every year, we use a group of hunters. We take 20 to 30 deer off that 54 acres. And just 2 weeks ago, I look out in the wheat field behind my house and I count a herd of 20. So it's for somebody in agriculture, it can be pretty discouraging, because we take, pretty good numbers of deer off there every year, but yet there's not much around us going on in terms of reduction. So, boom, it's a vacuum. They come back in. And it's our problem, kind of our problem countywide. Let's look at a success story, though, in Montgomery County. One of the things that came out of the task force is a lot of good data collection. We're really good now at collecting all this data and all these deer impacts. This is number of deer vehicle collisions. In the year 2000, we had 2,033. In 2017, we had 19 and 25. You might say, Doug, that's not much of an impact. Well, but you got to remember, in that 17 years, we added 180,000 people in Montgomery County. We added more roads. We added a lot more vehicles. So to see that number remain the same or actually decrease is actually quite a success story. And, I see it from both sides because I hear it from farmers, and I get it. Deer are killing me, all right? I can't make it. I get that. But what I tell them, I said, look, we have probably the most aggressive county-wide deer management program in the country. And if there's one or two better, that could be, but there aren't many. All right? I don't know how bad it would be if we weren't doing anything. So that's kind of where I leave it. But I think if you want to get something done on a countywide basis, and Jonathan mentioned it, it's important to have that political willpower behind you. And this group did. Here's, again, the accident stuff. And talk about underreported. This area here is our ag area, all right? Each one of these red dots represents a vehicle accident. This is from 2017. They're not reporting accidents out here in this part of the county, so I really don't know how many we have, but it's significantly higher. But one of the things we do with this data, And Ryan can tell you, when we see a parkland with real high numbers of deer vehicle collisions, that's one good rationale for a direct reduction program. And where we've done that, we've actually seen the number of accidents go down dramatically in a number of cases. So that's important stuff. So 25 years of deer management, and here's some of the things that have happened. Some of this local, some of it state, some of it state and local. But a lot of this stuff, we've got this better data, we've got more bag limits, longer seasons, Sunday hunting, where it's easier to get crop damage permits now. It used to be a whole hassle, get somebody out, show them the damage and do all this. Not a hassle anymore. Intensive public education. We've had 100+ workshops and presentations just through, I think, Extension in Montgomery County, between Extension and Master Gardeners over the past 20 years. I mentioned about the collisions. Ag damage, yeah, it's a little disappointing. We're down in some places, stable in others, up in other places. I wish it were down everywhere, but it's not. Orion mentioned the donated venison. That's a real plus, I think. We've got understories growing back where populations have been reduced. Some new roads are actually incorporating, like the ICC, wildlife crossings, for example. And we've got 40 or more public lands with ongoing population management, either managed hunts or sharpshooters. So I think there's a lot going for this program. Is it everything everybody wants it to be? No. But it's a step in the right direction, and I think in particularly the urbanized counties, it's certainly a way to go.